Hello everyone, Charles Watts here. Welcome back to Inside Arsenal. I hope wherever you're watching or listening to this show around the world, you're having a very, very good start to your weekend. Bit of a special show today, stepping away from the usual stuff, just looking at me waffling on for 20 minutes or so. I'm going to have a guest come on and waffle on with me for about 25 minutes or so. And it's a guest you all know very, very well. He's been on the show before and very distinguished writer in the world of the Arsenal journalistic scene. I am, of course, talking about Sam Dean of the Telegraph. How are you doing, Dino? All good, mate?
Yeah, all good, Charlie. Thanks, mate.
Good. Good to have you on again. I know you're heading off on your honeymoon in the next few days, going to enjoy some nice sunny weather. And so good of you to share some time with us before you head off. Where are you going again?
The Caribbean.
Yeah, so, I went there on my honeymoon. Very good. Went to St. Lucia. It was very, very nice. Can imagine looking out the window right now in this horrible grey, cold weather. It's going to be, I'm jealous. Anyway, I thought we'd pop on, have a little bit of a chat about all things Arsenal. It's been a while since you've been on the show. It's weird time sort of for Arsenal at the moment, isn't it? There's a lot of sort of frustration, disappointment, and recent results. I think it's that classic cliche of this little break has probably actually come at a good time for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. I think there'll be a lingering sense of frustration and pain at the last few results, and going away with that sort of sitting as a bad taste in the mouth still, or as Arteta would put it, maybe a pain in the tummy, as he likes to say. But at least it's given them a chance to have that kind of mental refresh and reset, which he spoke about after the Liverpool game, and needing that. And I think psychologically that will be important for the players as much as physically, really. I don't think this Christmas, New Year period has been as physically demanding as previous years, certainly not last year after the World Cup. So I think it's more a mental thing, and getting some hot weather. The families have gone out too. There'll be a lot of sort of team bonding and work on the training ground. And I just think you can imagine the vibes are good, or that Arteta's trying very hard to make sure the vibes are good at least. And hopefully from Arsenal's point of view, that means they come back a little bit fresher and without that weight on their shoulders, which has kind of visibly been there, I think, since Christmas and in this sudden downturn of form.
Yeah, that Palace game, it just feels really, really important, that game, doesn't it? It's just one of those games you cannot afford for this to sort of continue. I looked at it, I was talking about it on a show a couple of days ago, sort of looking at, are we at sort of crisis point yet of the season for Arsenal? I don't think we're there yet, but if this continues for certainly two, I would say two more games, then you are. I mean, obviously out of the FA Cup, and if things go wrong in the next couple of games and you're suddenly looking at about a 10-point deficit in the Premier League, then it's going to be a long, hard second half of the season. But if they come back, they find some form, they find some goals, most importantly against Palace, then you can kind of kick on again and just put what's happened down as a little bit of a blip, can't you? It's not. We're kind of at that teetering point of the season where it could go either way.
Yeah, I'm personally not at crisis point kind of moment in my head. I think I've been covering Arsenal for more than 5 years now, and in that time, especially at the start, I saw some bad teams and I saw some really bad performances. And while this run of results is kind of comparable in terms of 1 win in 7, and the actual points on the board have been pretty bad and among the worst runs that Arteta's put together or anything that Unai Emery produced, I think the performances are absolutely fine, which sounds mad, obviously, but the issue here is not in terms of the structure and the system and what they're doing and the players in the squad. It's purely an issue of finishing. And I know too much is made of XG, and I'm still slightly, unconvinced on that as a predictive model. I think it's a good reflective thing. But if you look at it reflectively, like I think Arsenal have scored 1 goal from what they should have scored 6 or 7 in the past few games, and conceded 6 from what should have been 1 or 2. So this does really feel like an anomaly, a bit of a freak run. But you're right. Suddenly, if that becomes longer lasting, or if that becomes a thing that really affects the minds of the players, then it can cause systemic issues and it can lead into something bigger. So they need to stop the rot quickly. But I'm even if they played really, really well against Palace and somehow draw 0-0 again after hitting the post 7 times, I still don't think internally they'd be thinking this is a crisis. They've got to judge it based on performances and what they're doing and how they're playing. And yeah, it's fine margins with the goals sometimes. And I think you have to trust the players over the course of the season to kind of get that right, rather than rip up the whole thing and really go into panic mode.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how I'm feeling about it. I think coming out of that Liverpool game, it was really disappointing, and you could feel it around the stadium. But when you sort of look at it in a cold light of day, there was no way you could sort of come out of that and think that wasn't a decent performance from Arsenal. It was a decent performance, but they just, in both boxes, again, similar to the West Ham game, they let themselves down in terms of their finishing, and defensively they weren't good enough. And sort of defensively, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because all the focus is on the finishing and the lack of goals, but defensively, things that weren't happening at the start of the season have started to sneak back into their game a little bit. The set piece issues, which we saw at the end, towards the end of last season, which became a little bit of a running theme, and it's not just at the attacking end of the pitch that they've got to get things right again and sort of sort themselves out again, isn't it? I think defensively, there's definitely things that they need to sharpen up on if they're going to get out of this little rust of form.
Yeah, I think the set pieces thing is the main one, because that's in pretty much every game they've dropped points in recently, or even the ones they've almost dropped points in, like Luton. The set pieces issue has been the big one. And against West Ham, obviously, the first goal wasn't a set piece, but the second goal was the one that really killed the game, I think, for Arsenal. And it allowed West Ham to properly sit back and say, we've got a 2-goal lead, we can sit on this and protect this. And it changed the dynamic in the wrong way. Obviously, Liverpool, that first goal, it was the winner from a set piece. Fulham, they scored their winner from a set piece too. So it's clearly becoming a pretty significant issue for Arsenal, who have been very good at set pieces until December.
It's weird, isn't it? It's like, what? It's like there can't be something that's sort of happening on the training ground or something different they're doing. It's weird that it suddenly sneaked back into the game. Do you think it's just coincidence, or there is actually sort of more of a fundamental error that sort of causes this little sort of glut of goals that we're seeing from set pieces?
Well, I think the fact that Premier League clubs now have set pieces coaches who work specifically on this shows that it probably isn't coincidence. You don't put this kind of thing down to luck, because you have someone there trying to skew the odds in your favour as much as possible. I think what is relevant is that they played Luton and conceded 2 from set pieces there, I think, who Luton are a very good set piece team. West Ham are arguably the best set piece team in the league, and Liverpool have Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's arguably the best sort of set piece deliverer in the league, if not in Europe. So they have played against 3 teams who are experts in those positions. So it's no wonder they've been a bit more vulnerable. But you'd certainly expect that Nicolas Jover's sitting there in his office at Arsenal and frantically trying to find a solution for this, because it will come on him eventually if they keep having this problem. And evidently something needs to change on that. Obviously, Palace will be similarly hoping to pack the box from attacking set pieces and win free kicks in the Arsenal half. So once again, it'll be a problem for Arsenal to deal with. But yeah, the thing is, for all the set piece coaches there are and for all the control they have, there's only so much you can do when Trent Alexander-Arnold whips it into that zone, and you've got to make a decision whether to jump for it or not. And Jakub Kiwior made the decision, got it wrong, and goes in the back of the net. And yeah, that's football, I'm afraid. When a player like Trent is whipping it in with that kind of pace and accuracy, that is always the danger.
We are obviously slap bang in the middle of January at the moment, and there is a lot of focus on the squad, and obviously the lack of goals that obviously brings with it a conversation about the strikers that we see, and Mikel's sort of facing questions at in most press conferences at the moment. You wrote a story, actually, didn't you? That I've got it here. Let's bring it up just to show. But you put a story out yesterday on the Telegraph about Joshua Zirkzee, 22-year-old Bologna, that Arsenal are keeping tabs on. It's not the first striker we've seen linked. Probably won't be the last striker we've seen sort of mentioned with Arsenal. It's and I'm sure you're in the same situation as me. The sort of what you're hearing and the messages you're getting from people around the club is that yes, they are open to doing some business this window if they possibly can, but it is hard. It's going to be difficult, especially if you're looking at big prices. I mean, what do you think or predict for Arsenal's window over the next sort of 3 weeks or so in terms of what they can or potentially, more importantly, can't do?
Yeah, I think can't is probably the operative word here. I think, first of all, let's start with Zirkzee. I think if he is a player, and basically what I know from numerous people now is that Arsenal are closely monitoring quite a few strikers in Europe. He is definitely one of them they're keeping an eye on. Whether that means they can make an offer for him this month, I don't know. I think it's probably unlikely at this stage still. whether they can make an offer for him the summer, maybe a different issue, or maybe he's one of the ones on the list that they could consider for the summer. All I know, he's definitely a player they like and they admire. And as I said in the story, I think it's still pretty unlikely that a January move can happen. I think for January, what needs to happen really for Arsenal is for the dominoes to fall. And for that, I think it'll probably be somebody leaving. You can take your pick who that might be. At this stage, we don't know. Obviously, there's interest in Eddie Nketiah, sort of long term from Crystal Palace. Aaron Ramsdale will have admirers for sure. Emile Smith-Rowe, we see he's not getting the minutes that he'll want. For sure. We see how he's not playing that big a role in the Arsenal squad, and at one point he will surely have to consider his future too, and Arsenal have to consider that one as well. So there are a few spinning plates at the moment. The issue for Arsenal is obviously a financial one, and as I'm sure as we all know, and has been discussed a lot, they spent a lot of money in the summer. They need to be careful. There's a reason they did the David Raya deal as they did, with a loan with an obligation to buy. Sorry, not an obligation, an option, which is effectively an obligation, but is not technically an obligation. But they are fully expected by everyone involved to be paying 30 million for David Raya this summer. So that's already sort of factored in. So frankly, it's not straightforward at all. And my expectation is that unless something changes in terms of outgoings, or they can find a deal that's a loan maybe, or structured in such a way that makes it doable now on the accounting front, I'm still struggling to see anything happening. And what I should say as well is that, and I'm sure you've got the same information, but the view internally at Arsenal is very different to a couple of years ago when they were still in that massive rebuilding phase and a lot of players were going, a lot of players were coming in. They're quite happy now with the squad they have and the balance they have in that squad across the board in defence, midfield and attack. Obviously, the issues come from injuries, and Thomas Partey being out has been a big blow this season, and the same with Jurriën Timber, who Arteta was going to use to kind of reshape and remold the team, and then had to basically put those plans on hold for months on end. So if they look at their squad when everyone's fully fit, they're quite happy. The issue is it's very rare that everyone is fully fit, and right now they've got this hugely pressing problem of they can't put the ball in there. So that's obviously why the fans are demanding a striker is signed. Obviously, the counter question to that is which striker do you sign and how much do you pay? And frankly, the answer is not obvious, and it's very much not a problem with an easy solution.
What was that noise?
Shocked my ring.
That's like trying to think what that sounded like.
It's like I had to ping in this coin in the press conference. You saw that.
It's like you finished talking and that was just the big crescendo at the end of your sentence.
Sorry.
Zirkzee's an interesting one, isn't it? Because with so many names linked, some big names as well. You think of the Tonys, the Osimhen's, players like that. Zirkzee's one of those ones that kind of feels more Arsenal in a way, that they've been working recently and how they look at players. He certainly fits a bill in terms of the age and but it would feel like a bit of a gamble. Is that the right word? I don't know. It's like you don't know exactly what you're getting here. I mean, he's a player who's just really starting to make his way in the game, isn't he? He's been around a little bit. Went off to Bologna, has had a good start to this season. I think it's 8 goals, 7 league goals this season. Got a couple last year for him, but nothing. It's been nothing groundbreaking in his career yet. And so you would be basically taking a gamble on potential with him. And you wonder when you look at Arsenal and where they are now, where they're trying to get to, and how they can really sort of take that next step. It's like, do you think that's what they probably should be doing when it comes to a striker, or would you go with more proven, big name, if that's what you want to call them, sort of striker who can really, really sort of take Arsenal on to the next level?
Well, how many of them are there?
Yeah,
that's the problem.
And basically, the two things that, Osimhen, I think clearly is going to be available for a very big amount of money with the release clause that he's got in his new deal. Tony's obviously going to be mentioned as well, but other than that, there aren't huge amounts, are there? There's not huge amounts of proper number 9s who you basically know will guarantee goals. There's not a load of Haalands on the market who are easily gettable.
No, exactly. So Zirkzee, for me, fits a lot of, or ticks a lot of the boxes that Arsenal usually look for in a recruit, in terms of his age, fact that he's got the different sort of physical profile as well. He'd bring in a different option in the front line. He's 6'4". He's a big guy. He's powerful. He can turn well. He's got good feet in the box. Finishes off both feet. And I think, fundamentally, he'd just be a different kind of player for Arteta to work with. But we saw last summer, and the last summer was when they got back in the Champions League, that Arsenal moved away from the 22-year-old project who could be the future star, and they spent £105 million on Declan Rice. They said, here's the player we want. Here is the player who takes us to the next level. Let's pay what we need to pay to get him. So if that's the position they're now in, and they now want to sort of build the squad in that way, where they want to get a showpiece man, the guy who is almost a guarantee, then I don't think that's going to be Zirkzee. I think it'll be someone more expensive, like you say. And I think Osimhen's the name that keeps coming up, and one that obviously is very exciting given what he's achieved at Napoli and the kind of player he is. I mean, when you look at some of his goals, I'm sure you've done the same as me and just watched it, and like the headers, for example, and the leap and the physical power, you can see why it would be tempting when you can imagine sort of Saka cutting in and curling across towards that guy, because he'll be an absolute different kind of animal in that penalty area compared to what Arsenal have already. But he's expensive. That's the problem. So whether they can keep doing that, making a Declan Rice signing every year, I don't know. I would suggest it's probably unlikely, or at the very least, completely dependent on them getting Champions League football every year, which we've kind of all assumed this season that they would get Champions League football, but it's not a guarantee. They're currently fourth, and there's a lot of very good teams in the Premier League. It's not going to be a guarantee for some time. So it's very hard to judge. I think that's why, as far as I understand it, they are monitoring quite a few different options around Europe, and Zirkzee is one of those options. I have my doubts, to be honest, over how much they really need a centre forward.
I was going to say, would you, if they didn't sign someone this window, which I think we'd probably right now put as the most likely scenario to come out of this window, is that they don't sign a forward. Would you be overly worried about Arsenal's prospects for the second half of the season if that is the case? Or would you fully expect the likes of Saka, Martinelli, Jesus, even Odegaard, Havertz, to some respect, to find their shooting boots again? Because we know they can do it. They did it last season, and so they can do it. They've got the quality is there to suddenly go on a run and score plenty of goals, and for Arsenal to win games more convincingly and to take their chances. So would you be overly sort of concerned about it? A lot of supporters will, but would you yourself?
Not really, but on the big caveat that Jesus needs to be fit. Obviously, we've seen he's training out in Dubai, which is obviously a good sign that this knee injury isn't a serious one. But if he's not going to be available consistently every week, then I think Arsenal really do need another option up front. If he is going to be around and going to be fit, then they're probably fine. I think they're not that far off. I said this before, and I made this point in a few pieces recently. I actually think the more pressing issue for Arsenal is another winger. And I know it's sort of an interesting discussion with different people have different views, but I think they need another Martinelli type who can play ideally on both wings. And that's actually more pressing than a centre-forward option, because they have Jesus, they have Nketiah, and they have Havertz who can play there very well. So that strikes me as kind of... And Trossard can play there too. Yeah. Although I'm not always convinced by Trossard up front, but he can play there. So
he goals when he plays up there.
Yeah. I see when you look at the squad and the depth, I see the wide forward, the winger option as a more sort of pressing priority. But then if Nketiah is sold, then obviously they've got to get someone else in. Or if Jesus is not going to be fit, they've got to get someone else in. So it's that balancing act, and this is why Eddie earns the big bucks, because he's got to make these decisions.
Yeah. I think the fact that Jesus has come back so quickly, I think is obviously very good from an Arsenal point of view. The last thing you wanted was him to suffer a bit of a relapse with this knee injury that was going to keep him out for a while. I think they're probably, I don't think I'd be too worried if they don't sign anyone. But I agree with you 100%. I think if you right now gave me £70 million and said go out and bring in one player or strengthen one position for the second half of the season, I'd be going for another wide man. I think the way Arsenal play, how important their wingers are to their system, and I just think they desperately need another option there, top quality option there, to just to give either one of the wingers a breather, to just try something new. A Pedro Neto who I think would be perfect. I do worry about Pedro Neto's injury record, though. It's like, do you really want to spend that sort of money on another player who's consistently injured? That would worry me. Michael Olise, someone like that. I know it's not going to happen, but I do think that would be the area that would really give Arsenal a boost. And I think they would. I still think they'd score enough goals without a central striker. I think they need to sign a central striker in the next couple of windows, but right now, I'd prioritise another winger over a forward. But that's just me, and I know a lot of people won't agree with that.
Yeah, I think I agree. The issue with it is, you make the point about if he gave you 70 million, Arsenal haven't got 70 million, and the only way they're going to get money is by selling someone. So then, when you sell someone, you create a gap. Yeah. So it's almost like I don't think you could. Maybe you could, but I think it'd be harder to justify selling Nketiah and spending that money on a winger, for example. You see what I mean? Like, or you sell Smith Rowe, and then you probably have a midfield shortage, or someone.
But he doesn't use Smith Rowe, so I'm at the point, and I'm a big Smith Rowe fan. Everyone on this watches his channel knows I'm a big Smith Rowe fan. But it's got to the point where he's just literally not using him, and so what is the point in keeping him around? So I don't see a sale of Smith Rowe now would leave Arsenal short, because he's just so clearly way off in the pecking order of Arteta. I just feel we're at that point now where you just may as well sell, because it's doing no one any good. It's not doing him any good. It's not doing Arsenal any good, and his value is just tanking every single week that he doesn't play. So
yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, if an offer came in for Emil in the next couple of weeks, I just think Arsenal would be mad not to take it if it's a decent offer, even if they didn't even end up signing anyone to replace him. It just feels he's so far off it in terms of Mikel's thinking, which is a big shame. Who would you sign then if you had it like? And this is just sort of thinking out loud. If you had suddenly Kroenke's found 70 million down the side of their sofa on their ranch in Texas, or who would you sort of pick up from somewhere? Who do you think could really come in and make a difference for Arsenal? I've got a feeling I know who you're going to say, actually. But,
who am I going to say, do you think?
Someone who probably generate a lot of rage on this channel, if you're right. And I'm actually so confident in who it's going to be that I've already prepared a picture of him. Let's see if I'm right. I'm right.
There he is. Yeah, I've made this point a few times. I mean, it's slightly tongue in cheek.
Are you going off the idea now? Are you finally moving away?
No, not at all. But it's not 100% serious that Arsenal should go and buy him now. The only point I like to make on Mudryk is that, as it stands, Chelsea are going to be nowhere near the Champions League. And they, at one point, are going to have to start selling players. And there's a lot of talk now, for example, about Conor Gallagher being sold because they've got to raise money to pay for all these deals they've done and all the deals they want to do. Like they're trying to buy a striker, for example, just like Arsenal. So at one point, they're going to have to start cashing in on some of these players. Mudryk is a player who has lingering value for them because he costs so much, because he's so young, because he has potential. And he's been obviously very disappointing. But Arsenal have done so much work on him. They were so convinced by him that I don't think they would have watched the last year at a chaotic Chelsea, which has been all over the place, and totally changed their minds on him. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that. I know for a fact that they think it would have been very different if he joined Arsenal in January. He wouldn't have played like he has for Chelsea if he'd played for Arsenal. Not least because he would have had Zinchenko there for support and a system that actually functions in a coherent and consistent way, and a coach who has a history of bringing out the best of young wide players. So, I don't know. January obviously would never happen, not least because Mudryk's actually started to play sort of moderately well in the last few weeks. But I still maintain my belief that at one point in the coming sort of 18 months, 2 years or whatever, Arsenal will try again, take him off Chelsea's hands. I can't let it go, basically. I just can't let it go. The other player I think Arsenal should really look at, and this is one for the summer, absolutely more than January. But we're talking about strikers and forwards and wingers, but in the longer term, they need to sort of revamp the midfield. Yeah. Thomas Partey is going to have a year left in the summer. Jorginho will technically be out of contract, but with an option. And I'd kind of be surprised if Arsenal don't trigger that option. And then he's out of contract, and obviously we know isn't really in the pitch in terms of first team minutes. So they're going to need to get at least one, if not two, central midfielders in the next couple of windows. Maybe sort of by this time next year, they've got to really be kind of revamping that. And I look at Barcelona, look at Frankie de Jong and think that is a player who perfectly suits Arsenal's system. He perfectly understands the kind of football that Arteta wants to play. He can play as a 6, he can play as an 8, just like Declan Rice. Those two would work really well together. And I look at it and think a midfield 3 of Odegaard, de Jong, Rice kind of has everything and would be really exciting. He could play like Jorginho did against Liverpool with a 4-2-3-1, change it up, or in a 4-3-3. He can sit there on his own in midfield. He can go box to box. He's just a really top player. And we all know in the whole world, the whole football world knows that Barcelona have got these enormous financial issues and financial pressures. The question is whether he'd want to come. And that was obviously the issue for Man United a few years ago when they tried to buy him and Barcelona were keen to do the deal by all accounts and de Jong said no. So that would be the issue, whether he wants to leave Barcelona. But when I look across Europe at players who fit and who might be gettable, albeit for a big fee, I think that's the guy in my view. But I'm sure Arsenal's recruitment staff have other views as well.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what they're going to do in the summer, how they sort of go again in the summer, especially if they can't do anything significant this window. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the sort of next stage is in the squad development at Arsenal in terms of where they go. We've spoken about him a little bit. I think we've mentioned him a couple of times already today, but Jurrien Timber, really good to see him back out yesterday. And Arsenal released a video. If you haven't seen it yet, head over to arsenal.com or on their socials and you can see it of Timber sort of stepping up his recovery over in Dubai. A bit unexpected. Obviously I knew he was going over there and I thought at some stage you might see a couple of vids of him doing a bit of jogging with the fitness coaches, something like that. But it looked pretty sort of intensive what he was doing. A lot. He was out there using the ball. Sort of short, sharp turning for someone coming back from that sort of knee injury is a good sign. Obviously, that they're not going to be risking anything when it comes to Timber, and they're going to be carefully managing the next, I would imagine, still couple of months before he even gets close to being around the team again. But a really good sign. I mean, it's very hard not to look at that injury to Timber on the opening day and just that sort of big question of what if that didn't happen? Where would Arsenal be now? How would they be setting up now? Tactically, what would they be doing just with that one player in terms of what he was going to bring to Arsenal? So it was really good to see him back out on the pitch yesterday. Yeah,
so I actually asked Arteta about this last week. I said, basically, how much did Timber's injury kind of derail the plans you had? And I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, yeah, a lot. And then he also, in that answer, referenced Thomas Partey and the sort of plans they had. And he said that, in pre-season, at the very start of the season, the world could see like a tiny glimpse of the direction he wanted to take the club in. And then obviously it all fell apart. So I presume by that he's referring to the way that they started the season with Partey at right back and Timber on the left. My understanding on Timber from day one was always that he could play like Zinchenko does, but from right back. And obviously in that first game of the season, Zinchenko was out and they put Thomas Partey there as sort of the inverted fullback from the right. My suspicion is that when everyone's fit, they can then alternate between Zinchenko and Timber and the right and left in terms of who's inverting, and that changes the way they play and the build-up. And Arteta spoke about them being more unpredictable. And I think that's probably what he was referring to, that the fact that they, at the moment this season, well, in the last 2 seasons, the inverted fullback has always been the left back, even when Zinchenko's out. They made Kieran Tierney do that last year, despite that not being Tierney's game. And against Fulham, they made Jakub Kiwior do it, despite that very much not being Kiwior's game. The only time this season they've moved away from that was in the most recent game against Liverpool when they changed the shape and played a sort of 4-2-3-1. And I wonder if that was kind of an admission that without Zinchenko, you can't really make Kiwior do that. It's not something he's comfortable with. He's a centre-back after all, not an inverted left-back. And that's such a specific and difficult position to play. It requires such a deep level of tactical understanding and experience that it's hard to just chuck Kiwior in there and do it. So obviously Timber can do it from both sides, and he can also play centre-back. He can play left-back in a different way. And I think the word is flexibility, and they've not had that without him. But yeah, on the injury itself, this obviously feels quite soon, I think, his return to sort of running and kicking the ball around as the video shows.
Really soon, I think. I was really surprised.
Yeah, I mean, the point you make, I think, is completely right, that this is no guarantee, or so this doesn't mean that he's back next week just because he's sort of running and kicking a bit. Like it's still a long old way before someone's ready for the rigors of Premier League football. But the one thing that's I think important to flag, and I don't want to sort of put any false hope in the mind of Arsenal fans, because I don't know when he's back. I suspect Arsenal don't know yet either, but they've just probably got a target they're aiming for.
Yeah.
But he had a very unusual ACL injury in that he had the ACL tear in the knee ligament, but there was not any other major damage to any other part of the knee. And as far as I understand it, and I'm really not an expert, ACL's injuries usually cause quite a lot of damage to the knee in general, not just the actual ligament itself, but the bits around it. I guess the meniscus, other ligaments, whatever, the tendons, the muscles, all the things that work into a knee that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. His was a remarkably and kind of unusually clean ACL tear. So based on that, I suppose it is logical that he might be back sooner than other players who have suffered ACL injuries. Mm-hmm. But we don't know yet. And we won't know until he's back in the matchday squad and until he's back in first team training. But I think from the moment I was told that in August that it wasn't a whole knee that's been messed up, it was just the ligament, that kind of gave a little bit of optimism that he might be back sooner than the usual 9 to 10 month or 11 month wait that you normally get for a serious knee injury like this.
Yeah. I've always kind of looked at it as just next season. I think anything other than next season is just a bonus. I think when it comes to Timber, it'd be great if he got back in March, but even then, after an injury like that, you just think, especially if Arsenal are in the mix for still in the Champions League and in the mix for the Premier League, it's like throwing him into the intensity of that end of the season when he's been out for so long with an injury like that. It just feels like it would just feel like quite a big risk. And anything other than next season, I think is a bonus for Timber. But it's great to see him back out there, and there's no doubt that his absence has caused a big issue for Arsenal this season. And you kind of look at where they are defensively right now. They are still a little bit short. When all the focus obviously is on attackers, wingers in terms of bringing players in. But if they do anything in this window, I do wonder if it is going to be, the focus might well be just adding another name to that back line, another bit of strength. And who that be, I have no idea. I've seen, obviously there's reports of potential loans, looking at loans. You wrote a piece actually about, again, this is more for the summer than right now, but Gerald Hato over at Ajax, young 17-year-old, that's mad, 17-year-old, and he's already being captain of Ajax. He's played every game this season. It's just incredible.
That's a great way to inflate the value, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's been captain already. That's another 5 million.
Yeah, very clever of him. I think that Ajax quite still confident that he will sign a new deal at some point because he's got about 18 months left on his deal, isn't he? But I mean, just the fact that they are looking at him, as you reported, suggests that they know that there is still a little bit of work to do at the back line, even if it doesn't quite generate the headlines that some of the other positions in the squad does at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, this guy seems to be one of the most promising young talents in Europe. And it's not really a surprise that Arsenal want him. Yeah. I actually think so much so that and I don't know this is just purely my reading of it, is if, for example, he decides to stay with Ajax and sign a new contract, which is totally feasible and would be logical for him to do, I think, to a degree, give himself another couple of years to develop there and really kick on, that would be completely understandable. And I'm sure Arsenal would agree. I don't think the fact that they then missed out on him would necessarily mean they have to go and sign another left-sided centre-back or left-back this summer. I wonder if they see him as someone who's so good and so worth getting in the long term that they should just do it if they can, rather than to think we need a left-back / centre-back. Let's get someone else in. I don't know that. That's just my own speculation. What I do know for sure is they like him and they want to get that done if they can, but it ain't that simple as ever. Just if you don't mind, just very quickly on the Timber, if I can just jump back to the ACL thing. I remember reading an interview a few years ago with one of the sort of leading knee surgeons who has worked with Arsenal players before, I believe. And he, if I remember rightly, made the point that it's not just the return to the actual field of play. It's actually the time it takes after that to get back to your usual confidence and physicality. And I think generally speaking, there's an acceptance that another 6 to 12 months of actually playing is kind of required before a player gets back to their usual level after an ACL. So yes, Timber could come back by the end of this season or the start of next season, but I think it would be unfair to expect him to come back at the level that you would expect from a player pre-injury for another 6 months, 12 months. And that's always been the case. And I think Arsenal have seen it themselves. Remember when Hector Bellerin came back, he looked like a very different player. And he took some time to sort of regain the physical power and speed that he had, if he ever did, in fact.
I think it's safe to say he never did, to be honest. It was noticeable, I think, wasn't it? It was. He just looked a completely different player after that injury.
I think also Rob Holding took some time after his ACL to get back to a confident physical level. And again, you could probably argue, and I don't know what he would say to this, so I can't speak for him, obviously, but I suspect he would say that he had to change his game or his body as a consequence of that injury. So yeah, there's a little bit of negativity on to throw your way after the positivity of seeing Timber back on the grass. But yeah, I think basically what I would caution Arsenal fans to go easy on him and not expect a huge amount for the first few months, even after he's come back and got in the team.
I think that's really important. There just can't be any expectations on him suddenly come in and be the saviour. He has to be so carefully managed. And like you said, it could well be another season till you see him back to hopefully the sort of form that he was showing. It's such a shame, wasn't it? It was just such a shame. There's very rarely you see a player come in and just look so at home and settled and just ready to make a huge impact. He just looked so impressive in the summer, and it was such a shame. It was certainly for him as well. You think you sort of make this dream move. You come over to the Premier League. You got all your family over, big excitement, your first game in the Premier League, and you get an injury like that. It was just a hammer blow for him and the club. But fingers crossed, he is now on the way back. In terms of what we've seen so far in Dubai, before we wrap this up, we talked about Gabriel Jesus. Obviously, that was good news. He was back. Fabio Vieira was out there as well. Thomas Partey, very, very close now, as far as I'm aware. Potentially the next couple of games he could well be involved. If not in the Palace game, then certainly the game after that, if all things go to plan. So he's knocking on the door again. And you sort of bring those three players, Jesus, Vieira, Partey, back into the squad, and suddenly things don't look quite so stretched with those players, and that will be a boost to Arteta, wouldn't it? Just getting those sort of players back and just adding some strength and quality to the squad.
Yeah. I must admit, I kind of keep forgetting that Vieira is injured, which is probably not a great reflection of that £30 million signing. But obviously, him coming back would give them more options, a bit more depth, maybe allow Havertz to play up front a bit more. But the one I think Arsenal fans should be really looking forward to is Partey.
What is he going to do with Partey, do you think? If he gets fit and stays fit, what can you see being Partey's role in this second half of the season?
Well, the inverted right back is a possibility. I know some fans weren't happy with it at the start of the season. I think that's reasonable, but I think that's very much a possibility. And when Arteta speaks about flexibility, that jumps to mind. I also think, to be honest, and this is not at all a criticism of Declan Rice, who everyone knows has been just phenomenal since he joined the club. But I do think the one area of the game in which Partey is currently ahead of Rice is that ability to play the ball through the lines, the disguise on the passes, that I don't know if courage is the right word, but I think it probably is, the courage to try and pick out Odegaard or Saka through 3 or 4 players. I think Rice, who is brilliant, and this is not a dig at him, but I think his game is slightly more conservative on the ball than Partey's. And I think when you talk about breaking down deep blocks and creating chances and putting the ball in the net, I think that could add a few percentage points for Arsenal. It could make that little bit of difference. That makes all the difference. If Partey can find Odegaard in a good position twice a game, that could be enough to win the game. And if Rice does it once, for example. So yeah, I can very much see Partey, Rice, Odegaard as a midfield 3. We saw the shape change a bit against Liverpool with the midfield 2 sitting. Maybe Partey and Rice could do that a bit more. I could see Partey playing inverted right back. I could see them just simply using it as rotation more. And with half an hour to go, bring on Thomas Partey, whether you're winning and he can help shut the game down, or if you're losing, he can help pick those passes out. So fundamentally, Thomas Partey is a really, really good midfield player who last year, I think from August until about March, April time, was by some distance the best defensive midfielder in the Premier League. So Arsenal have missed him, and I think he will make a pretty big difference if he comes back. The only thing I would say, though, is that if someone in, say, Saudi Arabia or Italy wants to buy him, then obviously Arsenal have to sell him because he's got 18 months of his contract and he earns huge money. So they need him and they miss him, but he's very much not sort of a must keep, if that makes sense.
No. I think, I would not be at all surprised if Arsenal start next season with Thomas Partey not in the squad. Put it that way. But if he does come back now and can stay fit between now and then like you, I think he's got a huge part to play in the second half of the season, and it just makes Arsenal immeasurably stronger to have Thomas Partey, a fit Thomas Partey, available to choose from, whether that be, like I said, a right back, which I really hope it's not, or in midfield, and that midfield three of Rice, Partey and Odegaard that we just haven't seen aside from in the Community Shield against Manchester City at Wembley is just a really, really exciting prospect, especially with some big games at the likes of the Etihad to come between now and the end of the season, and the Champions League as well. Look, Dino, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
I'm rambling here now. Sorry. If your info is that he's back sort of maybe by end of the month, why is he not an AFCON then?
Well, I was talking about this yesterday, and I think it does make sense because although he'll be back for Arsenal, the temptation won't be just to throw him straight back in. It'll be to give him minutes and build him up. But if he suddenly comes back fit in the middle of a major tournament and you're Ghana's key player, the absolute temptation then isn't just to give him 10 minutes one game and then build it up. It's just to throw him straight in, I think, isn't it? And I think if you're not fit to do that in an international tournament for the country, I can imagine that Ghana were like, "Oh, what's the point of just bringing him over here and then playing him for 10 minutes in the third qualifying game, group stage game, and then trying to build him into the knockouts?" I just it's just not. We've seen it before. Remember Wayne Rooney with England, stuff like that. It's just not a tournament. It's not a time to bring a key player back and start trying to build their minutes up and get them fit during a big international tournament, is it? I think it's much more sensible for everyone that you just do that carefully back at your club, where the temptation not to just start him straight away is going to be nowhere near as big, and the clamour from certainly the whole nation supporters is not going to be as big as that. So I think with my Arsenal hat firmly on, it's a very sensible decision from Ghana and Chris Hughton.
Yeah, well, it's certainly sensible, and it certainly suits Arsenal. And I'm sure Arsenal are massively relieved that he's not at AFCON. But if I was Ghanaian and this guy suddenly starts playing end of Jan for Arsenal, and therefore he would be available for the knockout stages, even off the bench in the quarterfinals, for example, I'd be absolutely fuming. Imagine if Harry Kane says, "I can't go to the Euros," then he plays a preseason friendly for Bayern Munich in late June.
I know, yeah. Okay, absolutely.
The biggest meltdown you could possibly imagine across the whole country.
This is exactly what I said yesterday. As a Ghanaian supporter, you'd be absolutely fuming at it. But
I mean, fair play to Arsenal, because that's for the sake of their player and their season, the right thing has happened. But I'm just sort of like, how have they managed that? Basically.
I know, but certainly from an Arsenal point of view, it'll be good. And fingers crossed if he does get back fit and then he stays fit, because that's always the big question mark when it comes to Thomas Partey. Look, mate, thank you very much. As always, whenever I sit down with you, this is we've rambled on a lot longer than I originally planned to keep you for. So thank you very much for your time. I know you're heading off to where are you going? To Stamford Bridge, aren't you? Pochettino's press conference.
Just Chelsea training ground, Cobham.
Press
conference today.
For the press conference. So hope you have a good one there, and you enjoy your weekend off. No game for you, and then you enjoy your honeymoon, mate. I hope you have a great time. And also, I'm in the press box actually for the Palace game, so you're not going to be there for that, are you?
No. If you could just fill the void by just talking about Mudryk for 90 minutes, that'd be great. It'll be like I'm there still.
I will do exactly that. You're not going to let that one go. I know. All right, mate. Look, have a great honeymoon. Yeah, have a great time away, and I'll catch up with you when you're back.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Thanks again.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, everyone, for watching. As always, be back tomorrow to talk all things Arsenal once again. Have a good one. Bye-bye.